Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenas noches. Bienvenidos a la sede virtual del Museo Nacional de Historia Castillo de Chapultepec. Mi nombre es Jacqueline Gutiérrez, yo soy la jefa de difusión del museo y organizadora de este encuentro que durante las últimas 6 sesiones, con esta la séptima, ha traído para ustedes algunos de los trabajadores de museos, profesionales de museos, de diferentes partes del mundo, quienes han compartido con nosotros sus experiencias, tanto de manera virtual como presencial, en parte emanadas de la pandemia por el COVID-19, pero también aquellas que se vieron pues de alguna manera obligadas a llevarse a la manera al mundo virtual o que trataron de presentar diferentes proyectos, alternativas durante la pandemia por el COVID-19. El día de hoy cerramos con una muy interesante charla con otro caso de éxito que fue muy interesante tanto ver como escuchar en esta pandemia, que habla de cócteles con un curador, la colección Frick durante y después de la pandemia. Nos acompaña para ello Giulio Dalvit, quien trabaja en la Frick Collection. Él es curador asistente de escultura de la colección Frick de Nueva York. Entre el 2020 y 2021 trabajó como curador invitado en el proyecto Frick Madison, centrándose en la exhibición de la colección de esculturas y medallas de Frick en el edificio Brauer. Anteriormente fue profesor asociado en el Instituto de Arte Cortland, donde también estudió su doctorado. Su investigación ha sido publicada en catálogos, libros, revistas académicas como The Burlington Magazine, Art History and the Journal of Warburg, and Cortland Institute, entre otras. Giulio ha recibido numerosas becas y ocupado varios puestos de becarios, conferencias e investigación en el Museo Paul di Pezzoli de Milán, en el tengo un poco de problema para pronunciarlo, pero bueno, Constrict Stories Institute de Florencia, the University College of London y la Universidad de Ámsterdam. En el Frick comisarió Propagazione Giuseppe Pernone en Sebres y de Everyland Gift con Aimee Nan, ¿es correcto? Javier F. Salomón. Estoy completamente mal pronunciando todos los nombres, pero bueno. Y bueno, pues Giulio aceptó ser parte de esta charla y nos va a hablar hoy justamente de Cócteles con un curador, que es un proyecto que ya les contaré más adelante. No solamente involucra una serie de videos, sino también un libro que me decía ahorita ha tenido un gran éxito. Como siempre, les agradecemos su presencia. De verdad ha sido muy importante tenerlos a ustedes en esta serie de charlas. Me quiero disculpar de antemano porque en esta ocasión desafortunadamente no pudimos conseguir un traductor para esta charla. Sin embargo, en los banners yo estaré tratando de tratar de traducir un poco de la charla, de lo que se está platicando. Las preguntas al final las haré en inglés y en español, y en unos días más esperamos poder resubir la charla con los subtítulos ya añadidos para aquellos que les cuesta un poco trabajo entender lo que se comentó. De verdad les agradezco muchísimo todo su apoyo para esta serie de charlas, y bueno, pues sin más, los dejo con Giulio Dalvit y su presentación. Giulio.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacqueline, for this introduction. Very kind. And apologies for not speaking Spanish. I was suggesting I might speak Italian, and many people would understand me, but probably English is the safest choice. Before we start, in a way, I would like to give a little introduction to what Cocktails with a Curator is. It's a series that my colleagues and I, that you see here, Xavier Solomon and Amy Eng and me, we came up with. The idea, actually, I should credit my colleagues for the original idea. I started at the museum further down the line while the program was already going. It's a series of 65 episodes that we shot during the pandemic. Once a week, every Friday at 5 p.m., we would start streaming an episode on one object in the collection. So they were monographic, in a way, episodes centered on one single piece. They would last around 15, maximum 20 minutes, addressing this one work with very plain language, in a way, accessible to everybody, telling the story of the work, the story of the way it came to the collection, and drawing connections, in a way, with similar objects from all over the world. The idea, the name also, Cocktails with a Curator, comes from the fact that every work was paired with a cocktail, for which we would give the recipe during the episode, and which sort of we explained why we thought could work quite well in a way with what we were talking about. There was very minimal editing. There was no script that we were following. We were talking off the cuff in a way, like I'm doing tonight. We just had some bullet points in front of us. So it was quite difficult in a way, getting to that point where you talk for 20 minutes about something which without requiring a lot of editing. There was no music. The camera was fixed on us. It was our laptop camera. We had a microphone, and we were recording what we were saying for 15 minutes, steady on with the camera. So it was also, in a way, doable on a weekly basis for our media team to keep up in a way with the recording of the episodes. It was, in fact, Cocktails was part of a threefold web series that we thought about. One was Cocktails with the Curators. The other one was Travels with the Curator, and it was a parallel series that existed for a much shorter period of time, where we would take, in a way, our public on a journey with us, starting with one object, and usually going to the origin, in a way, of that object, and creating, in a way, as if we were traveling together to the place where something originated and where a history could be told about the object. The other series was called Frick 5, and it was a series of talks with other curators from all over the world in other institutions, and it was 5 sort of very simple but and fun questions that were asked by one of the curators at the Frick to colleagues around the world. This was actually a series that lasted much less than the other 2. So to give you a bit of context about the museum we are talking about and the time frame when this happened, the Frick collection, as many of you probably know, is one of the main museums in New York on Manhattan Island. It's a collection of old masters from the 13th to the 19th century. And the moment, in a way, when we were working on, when we started doing Cocktails, was also a particular moment for the institution, because we were moving from this Gilded Age mansion that was built in the early 20th century by Henry Clay Frick, hence our name, on Fifth Avenue in New York. From this Gilded Age mansion that you see here, these are some of the most famous rooms in the house, the so-called Fragonard Room, and here the West Gallery, celebrated in all guidebooks to New York City. We were moving to a very different kind of building, as you can see, what used to be the Whitney Museum on Madison Avenue, built by Marcel Breuer in 1966. One of the masterpieces of brutalist architecture. So in a way, a building as historical, but a very different one that we decided to sort of decorate and to display, where we decided to display our works in a very different way. Why we were doing this? Because the house was being renovated. It was a long plan that was in the works for many years. In 2020, we had to move from the Gilded Age mansion to this very different building. The atmosphere in which we displayed the collection was very different. We decided to strip all the decoration and to embrace the very minimalist, brutalist setting of what we call Frick Madison now, where we moved in March of 2021. So in a way, the moment of the pandemic, where you see here this desolating image of Times Square, where usually there's millions of people, of crowds bustling. The moment when we decided to transfer the collection coincided with the moment of the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in a way, for us as an institution, we were more lucky than other institutions in the sense that we had already planned to close for a few months to allow for the move from one venue to the other. And it was exactly the months that we were required to be closed because of the pandemic. So we already had the plan to close, and we already had been thinking in a way about how to engage with our audience when the museum was effectively closed. So in a way, it was long in the making, Cocktails with a Curator, and it was something that we would have thought about maybe even without the pandemic, as it were. But we immediately realized that the situation was very different from what we had imagined, that the closure of the museum was not the same as we had expected. And so we started thinking about how to reach out to our audience while the museum was closed in this very difficult predicament, and how could we offer, in a way, some solace during this time? How could we still be relevant to people out there during the pandemic without the physical presence, not only of us as curator, but also without the physical presence of the objects, mainly? So with our mind, in a way, we traveled back in times to other very challenging moments for museums, thinking about what had been done in the past that could inspire us to do something in our present. And immediately, for all of us, in a way, the mind went back to the 1940s, where obviously the situation was even more dramatic than it was during the pandemic. But and in particular to what happened in London, at the National Gallery in London between 1940 and 1945. At the time, a very young Kenneth Clark, who was then only in his 20s, he was already the director of the National Gallery in London, and then would become this sort of mythological figure of a museum director and curator, had the very brave idea, together with the government, together with Winston Churchill, to secure and all the paintings and send all the paintings of the National Gallery to the quarries of Maynard in Wales. But immediately after sort of securing all the paintings away from the city, which was then being bombed by the Germans, what happened in 1942 was that during the Blitz, Kenneth Clark decided to start an initiative called Picture of the Month, which was effectively a series of exhibition whereby one painting would be taken from Wales all the way to London, one at a time, only one, because it was otherwise too dangerous to move more than one painting, and it would put at risk too many masterpieces. So one painting could be, in a way, put at risk, and it would be brought to London and exposed. It started with Rembrandt's Marguerite Giguère. It could be exposed to the public for a period of a month, and people would flock to the museum at the risk of their own lives, because bombs were being dropped over London. But people would stand in a queue outside the National Gallery in this sort of heroic and gesture of appreciating art at this especially challenging times. Soon thereafter, Kenneth Clark had the idea of pairing the Picture of the Month exhibitions with daily lunchtime concerts by Meyer Hess, where he would serve, where the National Gallery would serve sandwiches to the crowd. And you can see here the full room packed. For years, the concert at the National Gallery were a source of solace for the population. So many people said that it was what saved their lives effectively during the war, and what kept them alive and kept them going in a way under these straining circumstances. So in a way, for us, this was the inspiration, and we knew that obviously we couldn't rely on any sort of physical presence, which was so crucial in London at the time, but we had the possibility of doing things remotely on Zoom or any online platforms. But for us, the key thing was that we needed to find a way to pair art with something like the sandwiches at the National Gallery, something a bit more sort of convivial, and then that we had to find a fixed time when things would happen, as sort of as an exercise in timekeeping. I think all of us had the experience of losing track of time during the pandemic while we were all locked up at home. Cocktails with a Curator, the fact that it happened every Friday at 5, the moment usually when people end their weeks and they go for a celebratory drinks with colleagues, was a way to keep the time, to introduce the weekend, to create a schedule in a way, in weeks that otherwise felt no more like weeks, but one sort of blurry sequence of time with no interruptions. So the other thing was that it had to be focused. It had to be one work. It couldn't be more than that, because people's attention probably was more congenial for people to focus on one work than it was to look at broader narratives, which is also why I think the other series, Travels with a Curator, was not as successful in a way as Cocktails, because it lacked that focus that was really what attracted people. Because we could tell a story, one story that people were interested in, and then move on to the next the following week after processing it for the entire week. And then we also had the idea of coming up, not really with music, but with a little jingle that opened all the episodes. I think if you've seen the series, it's something that sticks still in our mind. It's a bit of a Pavlovian bell. We feel the need of a cocktail when we hear the jingle. So we started the very first week with what is arguably the masterpiece, the most important painting in our collection, this St. Francis by Giovanni Bellini, one of the most important Old Masters painting in America. And then we moved on and we covered all fields of our collection, all the pockets in a way of the collection. So we had episodes on sculpture. Here you see a famous bust by Francesco Laurana of an unidentified woman from the 1470s, from Italy, but also decorative arts. So things that were not necessarily as appreciated by people when they come to the Frick. The Frick is very famous for its paintings, and sometimes the sculpture and especially the decorative arts are overlooked by people. And Cocktails with a Curator was really an opportunity to shed more light and focus on objects that are sometimes disregarded in this very lavish setting of the house. Here you see this wonderful commode by Jean-Henri Carré-Gesner, the cabinet maker to King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette in particular. This was made for Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, obviously beheaded during the Revolution. And then it was also a way to explore even further the holdings of the museum. So we had an episode, for example, on a carpet, this carpet, a Mughal carpet made in India in the 17th century for Shah Jahan. It's an incredibly important piece that is usually always in storage. So it was also an opportunity for us to talk about drawings or carpets like this, objects that usually are off view for the public. So the public could get to know sides of the collection that are not normally accessible. Or, for example, this little vase, it's something as big as this, it's called the vase Japon, which has absolutely nothing to do with Japan. It's an object tied with the history of China in a way. It was made in Sèvres in France as a commission from the king, as a gift for the Emperor of China. And it might very well be one of the very, very few survivals from the fire instigated by the British during the Opium Wars of the Summer Palace, which is where the Emperor of China kept all the gifts from Europe, which very aptly was destroyed by the Europeans during the Opium Wars. So again, a small object which could tell a very interesting and somehow also controversial story that is otherwise normally overlooked in the path, in the visitor's path across the collection. And also, that's also true for this sculpture, the only probably monumental bronze sculpture to survive from 15th century France. Everything, as you know, was melted down during the Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. This is the only survival, and it's usually in the garden court at the Frick, in a garden among the flower beds, and people don't really pay attention to it. And here we could give 20 minutes in a way of celebrity, 15 or 20 minutes of celebrity to this work. To think that every episode was watched by an average of 20,000 people meant a lot to us. This object would not get that kind of attention in its usual museum setting. And also a way to present new acquisitions of things that were acquired by the museum during the pandemic while we were closed. For example, this gift from Alexis Gregory that came to the museum in 2021, and we could not present it to the public at first, other than via Zoom on Cocktails with a Curator. And then 830 medals that came to the museum, including this one. And we realized, in a way, it was so useful also for us that each and every one of these objects had a story to tell. It was very easy to come up with 20 minutes of storytelling about these. And I think really the storytelling was central to our strategy. No matter how small the object, there was something very interesting to say. Or sometimes objects were very complex, and that's the case of the Fragonard room, a series of a dozen canvas, more or less, divided in two cycles, painted first in the 1770s, then in the 1790s, the second part. This was the only episode that was so long, and the history of these paintings is so complex that it had to be split in two in a way. First, the cycle of the 1770s, second, the cycle of the 1790s. So it created two episodes of Cocktails. And in a way, from that point of view, the most challenging object that we addressed during the series was this the still life that we used as the cover image for the program by Chardin, because what is the story that you tell about a still life? What is there to say about an object like this for 15 minutes? And so I think it was also for us an exercise in how to address different objects differently for a very layered and varied audience that was out there listening to us. And in a way, we wanted also to surprise them somehow with objects that were not maybe what they expected. It could a little coin or a little object that they might have completely overlooked in porcelain on a little shelf in the museum. So the other fact was that as you work on a series, time in a way goes by while you're working on the series. And especially during very challenging times, the world around us changes quite a lot while we're going on and on for 65 weeks talking about works of art in the collection. And there are two possibilities in a way: either you ignore what's happening or you address it face on. And that was the case of the George Floyd killing in the US. Of course, you've heard about this. The whole movement of Black Lives Matter that was really rekindled by this tragic episode. And at the time, we decided that we needed to do something, and so one of the weeks was really dedicated to 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence and a black screen with our audience. That, in a way, was a way to connect to what was happening around us. It was a way to show that the museum and what we were doing and this series was not isolated from what was happening and what was surrounding us, which was very clear as far as the pandemic was concerned. But 2020 and 2021 were very difficult times, not only for the pandemic, but also for other reasons. So it was also a way for us to address certain complexities at the heart of our collection. So I remember distinctly the episode that was done on this portrait bust of our founder, Henry Clay Frick, who's a very controversial figure in American history. He was a so-called robber baron, and a famous industrialist, but also a strikebreaker, someone who might have had a responsibility in the killing of many people during strikes at his plants in Pittsburgh, where he supplied coke for the steel industry. This was an occasion of reckoning in a way, and a way for us. Normally, this bust is just a presence in the whole of the museum, and it's not something we talk about really with our public. And it was an occasion to rethink about the history of the institution, to rethink about how we wanted to position ourselves and position our founder in a way in the future of our institution at this particular time of change, while we were moving to a new location, while we were thinking about how to go back to our historic house. So another way, I think it was very interesting also for us to think about how the new series dovetailed quite well with the new display. So this very focused monographic series worked very well with the new display in the Frick Madison that is really centered around key pieces. It's an exhibition of masterpieces from the collection. Effectively, it's not. It doesn't even attempt to display all that was in the house. It's a selection. It's a more focused project, and in a way, it works very well with cocktails. And cocktails, I think, informed the way we thought about the display in a way, but definitely informed the way people have come to experience the museum. So these 2 years have become a moment when people, also thanks to Cocktail, which people can play also on your audio guide of the museum on their phones, how people can experience our museums on a one-on-one basis with the artworks, more than experiencing the setting that is peculiar to the house in a way. Frick Madison is about an intimate connection with each and every one of the objects. Maybe you come in, you see 3 paintings, and you leave because you spend 20 minutes in the company of each of them. And in a way that's a fulfilling enough visitor experience. At some point, it became clear for us that we would turn the series into a book. And that also meant that we had to put an end to the series, that we had to come up with a number of episodes. The book cannot be endless. The web series could continue, not forever, because the holdings of the museum are not endless, but it could continue for much, much longer. instead the book had to be to sort of sit within a certain format. And so we decided that we would reach 65 episodes and then we would stop. Obviously, it came at a price, and we couldn't talk about some key masterpieces of the museum that I've put here for you. The Titian Man in a Red Hat, one of the most celebrated paintings in the collection. The famous Renoir, Degas, Duccio, Franz Hals, the Boucher room, an entire room that was entirely overlooked in a way in the series of Cocktails with a Curator. So the book, the size of the program came with its exclusions, which is, I guess, inevitable. And also the text in the book were shortened, they were edited, they kept the same tone of voice, the same direct address to the viewer, to the audience, but there was much more editing involved, and they were sort of shortened into something sweet and short that could be read while preparing a cocktail for an evening with friends. And the other major change, in a way, for the book project was that we sought the collaboration of an artist, Luis Serrano, who lives in Italy, but he's of Spanish origins, who worked on these beautiful drawings of details after each and every one of the 65 works we discussed. So this is just to give you a sense of Luis's work outside of the series of drawings that he made for us. This is a series of beds and sofas that he made some years ago. In a little box that you see in the red, sort of surrounded by red lines, we gave the recipe for the cocktail, which we would say aloud during the episodes, and would be in the little box on YouTube underneath the episode. And we would, in italics underneath, explain why we thought that the cocktails was a good pairing, in a way, with the work of art we were discussing. The reasons could be very different. It could be because there was a particular connection, as for example, in this case, the Laurana bust. Francesco Laurana was an artist who was, we say, Italian today, but effectively he was born on a little island, Vrana. So the Laurana is de la Vrana, actually. And Vrana is a small island in what is today Croatia. And so I came up with the idea of pairing the bust with a cocktail, a Dalmatian, as an homage, in a way, to the origins of the sculptor. A wonderfully strong cocktail with some black pepper syrup in it, which was really a wonderful concoction. Or, for example, in this case, one of our Whistlers, we have a large collection of Whistler paintings. It was one of the obsessions of Henry Clay Frick. The Whistler was paired with a sake highball as a way to indicate to our public that Whistler was very passionate and very fond of Japan. He is part of the movement known as Japonism, and he was very attentive, especially in this particular portrait that he made of Mrs. Leland. He was very attentive to Japanese prints from the 18th century, especially. But in a way, I think it's useful to think about the very first pairing of a cocktail with one of our paintings. The painting is the one I showed you before, the St. Francis in the Desert by Giovanni Bellini, one really of the masterpieces of the Italian Renaissance in the United States. And, Giovanni Bellini, there's a cocktail which is called a Bellini. So in a way, the most obvious pairing would have been Giovanni Bellini with a Bellini. In fact, we wanted to create a different kind of pairing. We went for Manhattan to sort of make the contradiction explode of this wonderful Italian altarpiece that all of a sudden finds itself on Manhattan, and it's a painting about light. We are now showing it in a wonderful room in the Breuer building with a window next to it, and there's the sunlight of Manhattan pouring through the window. And so this painting of St. Francis receiving the stigmata from the light of God, effectively, he now seems to be receiving the stigmata from the light of Manhattan somehow. And this is the element of the unexpected, in a way, that I was talking about before. We tried to surprise our public with little things here and there, and to surprise also ourselves, to learn something new and to think about new aspects and new angles from which to address the works of art in our collection. I think it's very important that along the process, we ourselves learned a lot of new things. And I think that's testament to the kind of work that we were trying to do. 20 minutes of off-the-cuff talk about an object can only come with substantial research on every single one of these objects. So it was a very intense program to work on for us. It required a lot of time. For each and every one of the episodes, we studied hours and hours and hours. We went through all our curatorial files. Our assistants at the museum scanned for us, because so many people were actually allowed on site, scanned for us all the curatorial files. We went through them. We went long ways to find the necessary books during the pandemic to study the paintings we were working on. And we discovered new things about our own collection that we didn't know before. There was always new research involved. We were always opening up, in a way, a cold case that had been there for a long time. And now lots of new ideas for exhibitions for the future years at the Frick actually have originated during the period of the preparation of cocktails. And we also, because we brought these paintings and these works to the attention of the public, we got amazing responses from the public, also from the specialist public. Professors from all over the world were following the series and were emailing us afterwards with sometimes small corrections, sometimes references or additions to what we were saying that we didn't know about, or snippets, in a way, of the history of these works that were completely unknown to us. So I think that's the beauty also of this series, is that it worked on so many different levels, and it was enjoyable. And that's something we always try to do at the Frick, as much by the very general public, not necessarily educated in art history, as it is from the very specialist audience of museum curators or university professor and academics in general. So it was a learning experience. It was a learning experience for the public. Also, I think that we were very lucky because there was the time and the space for the public during the pandemic for this learning experience. There was, I think, a desire, a strive towards learning. We felt that we were locked at home, and we were in many ways saving a lot of our time. We had more time on our hands, and we didn't necessarily know what to do with it. And we wanted to learn new things. It could be about cooking and baking, or it could be about works of art in museums. And I think we addressed that, and it was important that we drew a line at some point, and we decided that once we could go back to in-person meetings with people and we could reopen the museum, we would continue for a while with the series. But then there was a moment when it became very clear that we couldn't go on anymore. And if we wanted to end in glory, in a way, we had to stop, because time had changed and people had gone back to their lives, and the way this museum has a space in our everyday lives and had changed quite dramatically. It was an occasion for us, I think, to build a new audience, an audience that was trans-generational. We had people in their 90s watching the series as much as people in their teenagers, who would connect on the chat live. They would talk to each other. It created a small, not so small, a community of people. More than almost 2 million people watched these episodes overall, which is an astonishing result. And the audience was not only transgenerational, it was transnational. It spanned the entire globe effectively. And so we created an audience also of people who now, from Europe, from Africa, Asia, South America, want to come to the museum to see some of the works they've grown so fond of. And as a tribute, in a way, encapsulating all this, yesterday, I was telling Jacqueline before, we had an event, a book signing event for the Cocktails with the Curator book. And we thought that 30, 40 people would show up, which is what usually the sort of the numbers we are used to in small institutions like ours when we present a book. And instead, 400 people came to have their books signed on a chilly New York Wednesday night. So it really meant so much to us. Some tears were shed by people saying that Cocktails with the Curator saved their lives. An ER doctor told us that Cocktails with the Curator saved his life, which was, we said that probably he was saving other people's life, and probably we didn't. But it was honestly a very moving tribute to the work that has been done, not just by us, but by the entire staff of the museum over the last couple of years. So thank you. I think this is sort of the introduction that I wanted to give to the series, and I'm very happy to answer all questions that you have.
Thank you, Giulio. I think it's very, very interesting that you have started something that tried to communicate the collection in a very direct way, and at the end you get to have a product that was very important for a lot of people, that became another product, and that somehow started also a new way to see your collection.
Yes.
Which I think it's amazing. No sé si alguno de ustedes tenga alguna pregunta, se la puedo hacer en inglés y trataré de traducir la respuesta al español. Me parecería muy interesante que, pues escuchar sus comentarios con Giulio, que aceptó hacer esta charla en vivo, a pesar de que, como él acaba de comentar hace un momento, ayer se presentó el libro que sale de esta serie Cócteles con un curador, y que fue una presentación para la cual el museo se preparó muchísimo, porque pues representó el fin o el producto final de una serie que comenzó durante la pandemia, pero que se tradujo en un libro que además ha sido pues muy, muy famoso y que ha tenido grandes ventas. Me está preguntando Cecilia Chávez, la asistencia, está ya el formato de asistencia en los comentarios si lo quieren ver. No sé si tengan alguna pregunta. Bueno, yo sí voy a hacer alguna. Básicamente le quiero preguntar a Giulio, ¿cómo fue esta idea de adaptar el lenguaje que normalmente los curadores o aquellos que trabajan como investigadores en el museo siempre tienen un tipo de lenguaje mucho más académico, mucho más técnico? ¿Cómo fue el reto de adaptarlo a un lenguaje mucho más específico para un público en especial? Giulio, how was the challenge?
Yeah, I've understood. So if you want I think we always try to use at the Frick a language that is accessible to the widest possible public. I think it should be part of a curator's also education in a way, to be able to address different publics, also with different media. So if a curator is writing a scholarly article, obviously for the Burlington magazine, he's going to address his audience in a certain way. If we are publishing, we have a little series of books that are sort of similar to cocktails in a way, and where I should have mentioned this, that were important in a way in thinking about cocktails. It's a series of monographic booklets, which are called diptychs because they are divided in two. And one half is a contemporary artist of any kind. It can be a novelist, it can be a visual artist, it can be a film director, musician, sort of focusing on one single work in the collection, and reacting to it in some way or another. It can be music written by a composer, it can be drawings inspired by the work, and the other half is the curator writing a monographic essay on the work. And that particular those particular diptychs, I think, set an example for us of the kind of language we wanted to use. The diptychs, I think, are full of new discoveries about the works, which are made available to the scholarly community. But at the same time, it's something we sell in the shop, and it's very, very successful among our audience because they are books that you can read over 1 or 2 days. You can flip through them. They're beautifully illustrated, and the public can read the essay. And we have to sort of strike the right language that is not too academic. And it's not, I think, something that sometimes happens in museums is that you see that the public is treated, in a way, the language is a bit dumbing towards the public and it's oversimplifying things. I think we work with incredibly complex objects, sometimes with a very layered and complex history, sometimes with controversial histories. And I think we need to accommodate for this complexity with a language that is accessible to the public. And the two things are not contradictory. I think centuries of scholarly tradition have sort of accustomed us to the idea that simplicity is the opposite of sort of intellectual thinking. I think one of the good things about the English language is that that's never been really true. And when you can say something clearly, you are contributing to the advancement of thinking in a way. So I think it's important to say things clearly, to say things in a way that is accessible to the public, even if they are immensely complicated. The effort should be to make it simple, without making it stupid.
I would like to know how or what you do in your communication campaign to present this idea to the public at the museum. Nale Bassan thinks that it's very interesting and that the public receive it very well.
You mean this idea, the idea of cocktails with the curator?
Yes.
So there was the idea was, in a way, the whole thing started with my colleagues Amy and Xavier, with our head of communications and head of social media at the Frick, Alexis Light. And the idea was really to proceed in parallel, so that the social media presence of the museum over the months of Cocktail would, in a way, pivot really around this initiative, which was central to our social media strategy. So we really bombarded in a way our public with this series. It was also, I think, quite on social media, the fact that we had this constant presence at Friday at 5 p.m. is something that people at some point started registering and acknowledging. So it went from, look, this series exists, to don't forget, this Friday there's the new episode coming out. Which is, I think, also what you see what Netflix does in a way with new series. They are launched, and then it's about keeping the public faithful to the series throughout. It's also, if I can add something,
Yes.
also to the point that you were making at the beginning, Jacqueline, it's also a product that, because it's on YouTube, now it's there and it will be there forever in a way, and the public can go back to it as many times as they want. So it's true, the episode, I think what we saw was that during the pandemic, people really wanted to connect at 5 p.m. on a Friday and have the experience of the live streaming in a way. But later on, people would go back to the old episodes, so people would start the series from the beginning later on and sort of maybe binge watch like 5 episodes over a day, and then move on to something new, or to the latest. So now people can really use it the way they prefer.
Natalia Loredo pregunta, are you planning to do anything similar in the future?
Not for the time being, in the sense that, as you can imagine, now we are a team of 4 curators. So it's a very small team, and there's a lot of work for the move back to the house, and the dismantling of the current display and the new display when we go back. So there is a lot in the works, and new exhibitions coming up. So now, and a lot of in-person events that we do every week at the museum. So we are not thinking about something similar, but I think it did change our approach also to in-person events. So now all our events are accessible both online, on Zoom, live, and so they are streamed online while they're happening in person at the museum, for example. So they are not grouped together into a series, but we are definitely making use as much as possible of the live streaming on the web.
I think that's all the questions. I have another one. Can you tell us a little bit about how the collection of the museum, how many pieces it has, how it has been rounded or collected during time,
Yes.
and which one is your favorite piece in the museum?
So how many pieces? It really depends how you count, because it's a house museum. So let's say there are 2 main nuclei of the collection. The first one is the bequest from Henry Clay Frick, who died in 1919, and that accounts for roughly 50% of the collection. And then the other half is later acquisitions. Some of the icons of the museum are in fact later acquisitions. And I say it depends on how you count, because it's a house museum, and every single pedestal is an 18th century piece of furniture from France, and vases on top of it are porcelain that can Ming vases from China. So there are hundreds and hundreds of decorative arts piece, let's say. So I would say, I can tell you that at Frick Madison, when we narrowed it down to the masterpieces of the collection, it's around 250 pieces overall between all different media. But as I told you, there's 830 medals that we just received from a gift a few years ago. So that already sort of makes the number go up. So yeah, that's roughly how the collection has come about over the years, and the numbers.
And which is your favorite piece?
Oh yeah, sorry. That's a question I always struggle to answer. The Frick is a collection known for the quality of its holdings, and all of the pieces have something wonderful, amazing, and special about them. So if I had to choose one, I would say the portrait by Titian of a man in a red hat, which was also the subject of one of the diptychs that has just come out that I wrote. But it's not the most important painting in the museum at all. It's just one I have a personal connection to, let's say.
Titian, right?
Yes.
Okay. Bueno, pues Giulio, I know you have to go, so we are around time. But thanks a lot for doing this. I really find this very interesting. And to the public, please invite them to see your show and to follow the museum where we can find you.
Sure. Yes. So you mean the website of the museum,
yes.
or
and the social network?
Yes. So we are on all the social networks. The name of the collection is the Frick Collection. And if you want to come in person, we are now on Madison Avenue in Manhattan. So you can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, on like all the social media platforms.
And on YouTube to see Cocktails with a Curator.
Yes. If you type Cocktails with a Curator, it's obviously the first result that comes up.
It's very easy to find. That's true.
Yes, very easy.
Thanks a lot, Giulio, and nice to meet you online.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Pues muchas gracias. Ahorita les pongo las redes sociales en los comentarios para que las puedan encontrar. Son muy fáciles, pero bueno, para que las puedan encontrar. Y bueno, yo nada más quisiera tomar un momento para agradecer, primero que nada, a todas las personas que nos acompañaron durante esta serie. Fue una serie que comenzó hace un año con la intención justamente de mostrar diferentes perspectivas, proyectos, ideas que tuvieran otros museos. Ahorita platicábamos un poquito con Giulio fuera del aire, digámoslo así, que pues para mí era importante que los invitados de este programa no fueran pues quizá aquellos que siempre vemos en algunos otros ciclos de museos o cosas así, sino que fueran trabajadores de museos, que fuera gente que pues trabajara, que estuviera en un recinto museal, pero que también tuviera pues esta experiencia, que tuvieran iniciativas interesantes, quizá iniciativas de éxito en muchos casos que se hicieron durante la pandemia, algunas de las cuales, como ya vimos, fueron pues iniciativas que se fueron creando forzados de alguna manera por la situación en la que nos encontrábamos. En otros casos fueron un seguimiento de aquello que ya se había realizado pues durante varios años en los museos, en el caso, por ejemplo, del Museo Nacional del Prado, que ellos ya tenían digitalizada parte de su colección, ya tenían muchos proyectos, pero que pues algunos de ellos se trasladaron a las redes sociales justamente pues durante la pandemia, o se trasladaron a diferentes proyectos que no necesariamente involucraban al público en vivo. En otros casos, pues por ejemplo, el caso del Museo de Bellas Artes de Chile, realmente fue una experiencia que también buscaba ser una experiencia en vivo, en salas, pero también me parece que en ese caso fue algo muy interesante de ver, porque aunque es un museo de arte, definitivamente ellos hicieron una cosa que era, de alguna manera enfocada en temas que no necesariamente pensaríamos en el arte cuando hablamos de él, ¿no? Desde derechos humanos, desde perspectiva de género, ¿no? Y todo esto pues ha formado la manera en cómo ellos explican su colección de arte a la gente. Creo que toda esta serie de charlas ha sido muy interesante también porque pues se platicaron los problemas o todo lo que no salió necesariamente bien, que en muchos casos nos pasó, o todo a lo que nos enfrentamos y que nos hizo dar cuenta de todo lo que nos faltaba de alguna manera pues al hacer en un museo. Para mí esta serie también fue muy, muy interesante porque pues bueno, pudimos aprender de museos de todo el mundo, desde España, los Países Bajos, México también, Chile, y creo que fue una serie que trajo diferentes perspectivas a lo que es la comunicación en el museo, que como yo les decía en el principio, para mí la comunicación no nada más es algo que se ve a través de redes sociales, también comunicas en cómo haces exposiciones, comunicas incluso en lo que no haces en tu museo, o cómo no recibes al público, o cómo recibes al público en el museo, ¿no? Entonces, justamente la idea de traer a todos estos expertos era comunicar desde diferentes perspectivas. No me quiero despedir sin antes dar a agradecer también a las personas que colaboraron. Esto no se los había comentado, pero este ciclo de comunicación en el museo fue hecho de manera totalmente gratuita y sin ningún peso. Todos los ponentes aceptaron de manera muy linda, muy amable, súper dispuestos a hacer esta charla realmente sin ninguna contribución. También, bueno, con el apoyo del subdirector administrativo del museo, Asgar Torres, quien pues nos ayudó con el pago de la traducción. Randy Rubio Huertas, quien estuvo detrás de toda esta iniciativa, desde proveer ideas, revisar todas las charlas, también fue pues participante con la primera charla de este ciclo, al historiador Salvador Rueda, director de este museo, que también pues nos apoyó muchísimo con todos estos esfuerzos detrás de cámaras que no se ven, pero pues que ahí estaban, y por supuesto pues a todo el equipo del Museo Nacional de Historia. Les agradezco a ustedes también el haber estado en este ciclo de charlas. Esperamos que los puedan ver, los puedan seguir disfrutando, y también pues su opinión sobre qué les gustó, qué no les gustó, qué creen que pueden mejorar. Esta charla en YouTube la vamos a poner subtítulos en unos días para que la puedan ver por si tuvieran algún problema para entender algunas cosas, y también en Facebook quizá la volvamos a subir o trataremos de ponerle los subtítulos. En aquellos que se inscribieron para las constancias de asistencia, les estaremos haciendo llegar un correo en los siguientes días, y durante diciembre, si todo sale bien, esperamos ya mandarles su constancia en línea. En caso de que nos atrasemos un poquito, les mandamos un correo también para que pues puedan verlo y saber que estamos trabajando en ello, no se preocupen. También les vamos a mandar por ahí alguna encuesta, nos ayudará mucho que los contestaran, pues para saber qué les pareció, opiniones, a lo mejor alguna pregunta que se les haya quedado en el tintero para alguno de nuestros ponentes. Y bueno, pues sin más, les agradecemos muchísimo a estas que nos han acompañado en este ciclo de charlas, y que tengan pues muy buenas noches.